It's something everybody in college football really is fearful about the rebuilding year. I remember listening to Nick Saban in 2021 after that season, I believe it was 21 or 22, talk about how that year had been a rebuilding year at Alabama. But he didn't know that going into the season. And that's kind of what I would ask you as you watch this. Do you think 2024 was a rebuilding year at Georgia? On top of that, do you think that 2025 will be a rebuilding year at Georgia? 2024, let's not forget, they won the SEC championship. I know, but people want to act like that's not a big deal. That's a big deal. I mean, you know who did not win the SEC championship in 2025? Excuse me, Alabama didn't. Texas did not. Texas A&M did not. Tennessee did not. LSU, the Gators. I can go on. You get my point. That you are the best team in your league, which is considering how up and down Georgia was in 2024, that is an amazing accomplishment to win the league that year. But was it a rebuilding year? See, I'm not sure that it was a rebuilding year so much as it was they had just injuries at the wrong time, quite frankly. I mean, injuries at the wrong time in a lot of different spaces. The quarterback, the running back, the offensive line. You had defensive linemen that were out. You had Spellman out. You know, it's just way too many guys. Can you get healthy? Can you get healthy going into 2025? If you cannot, you know, I have to say, just from my perspective, I mean, I did not ever feel like Georgia was going to get through 24 without a loss. I was not one of those people. I think that's an excessively positive or sort of Pollyannish way to look at the 2024 season. It was too difficult in terms of what was being asked. 25, I'm not sure you can say that as much about 2025. When you look at things, yeah, it is a challenging schedule. They still play Ole Miss. They still play Texas. They still play Alabama. But they play all of them at home. They still play the Gators. They still play Tech. They still play Auburn. But only one of those will be an actual road game, which is the game at Auburn. They play two really tough road games. At Neyland at the beginning of the season, and then at Auburn kind of in the middle of the season. The Tech game at the end, that will be at the Dome. They could follow that up a week later by playing in the SEC Championship again, or not. They might not. I don't know. My guess right this second is they probably will. Okay? So that's the thing is, you know, we don't know how much trickier 25 will be, but it sure looks less challenging than 2024. In the grand scheme of things, and you take a look at everything and all that, it just plain looks simpler. Our buddies over at BetMGM, I'll put it up on the screen right now. Use the code MEGABET, MEGA bet BET. This is as of right now, they are the co number 2 with Texas, and these numbers juggle around a little bit at different places. They're the co-favorite, the number 2 behind Ohio State with Texas at plus 650 to win the national championship. I mean, that's when you consider the challenges that Georgia's got, that is a pretty significant statement right there. The other thing that's significant is the Ohio State will be the favorite going into this thing. I'm not sure they should be or should not be, but the league is not as difficult. No offense. And you look at their schedule, it's just not a lot of losses. I'm not sure I see a lot of losses for Texas or Georgia either, but Texas and Ohio State do play one another to open the season. So somebody's losing. But when you take a look at things, I mean, it makes sense to me, but the important thing to remember about favorites and non-favorites, the favorite to win the national championship in college football coming into the season has not won it since 2017, which was Alabama. And they narrowly won it in more than one way that year. In more than one way. You may or may not recall the conclusion of the 2017 season, but I do. It happened right in front of me. It was an amazing football game. Georgia's played some fantastic football games through the years. When you think about fantastic finishes, 2012 Alabama, Georgia, 2017 Alabama, Georgia. 2021 Georgia, Alabama, 2013 Georgia, Auburn. 2013 Georgia LSU, the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma in 2017. I mean, the end of that 2017 season had back-to-back games that were, thrill-seeking. Like, they were straight up crazy. But when you think about the 17 season, that was not a year that a lot of people, well, it depended on who you talked to a little bit, but I don't think most people were like, yeah, they're going to play for the national championship. There were folks that were like, this is an older team. Kirby's, this is his second year, but this is an older team. He knows what he's got. He knows they're good. Sony and Nick won't be around in 18. I know it's his second year. You can a lot of times make a jump there, but there weren't, so it depended a little bit on who you talk to, but Alabama was clearly the favorite. Clemson was probably the two because they just won the national championship, but for Clemson, they had switched out a quarterback and all this stuff. The notion for Georgia coming into 17 was Jacob Eason's going to take it all the way, right? I mean, that was the discussion point there. That did not happen, which can be talked about at another time. But for the Dogs coming into 2025, you never know. I think you can tell when there is a rebuilding season in a negative way, looking backwards, for sure. You can tell when there's a rebuilding year, and I don't know why I said negative. I mean, I think typically rebuilding is almost always construed as negative. I would say for me, rebuilding at Georgia under Kirby has happened a little more often than you thought. Certainly 2016. I mean, there was a lot going on in from the transition from Mark's time to Kirby's time at Georgia, which is now 10 years ago, which is crazy, 10 seasons ago, which is crazy. But there was a lot that had to kind of get flushed out and sloshed through the filter at the time. But 2016 was certainly a rebuilding year. I would say 2019 was a rebuilding year. And that was a good Georgia team. I think 18 to some degree was, but not quite the same way. You were returning your starting quarterback. There was a lot missing in 19. You switch out offensive coordinator. Jake Fromm regressed. That was a good Georgia team. It was not a great team. But I would almost argue that 20 was a rebuilding year, just not circumstantially, just strictly because of the quarterbacks. That was not the case in 21. That was not the case in 22. I do not think that was the case in 23. But when you look back at 24, did they, quote, rebuild? They may have. I'm not sure you can say that about a year where you won the league. See, that's the thing. I'm not sure you can legitimately make that argument in a year where you won your league. Oh, well, it was a rebuilding year. Like, was it a rebuilding year at Clemson this past year? I don't know. I don't know. I think this is just what Clemson is. And that's the question. Are we just at the point that this is what Georgia is? They're good. They're just not going to win the national championship. I mean, that's Georgia and most programs, the vast majority of their time. I mean, who what player on this Georgia team is George Pickens or A.D. Mitchell even, or Ladd or Brock Bowers or Stetson or, who are those players that give you confidence? Now, going into 22, you knew those guys. Now, they had to replace the whole defense, but Jalen Carter wasn't going anywhere. I'm like, they rebuilt the defense quick. But so there was a lot of change in 21 to 22, and they were better in some ways in 22 than they were in 21. So my thing is, right now where Georgia's at, who is the exceptional player up on the board? Well, we don't know yet. That's what I would say. I don't know if Gunnar Stockton is going to be exceptional or not. I'm not ready to say he is or he isn't. I think we just do not have enough data on Gunnar Stockton right now. I mean, the guy has played 6 quarters of meaningful football at Georgia. And honestly, he's looked pretty good for the most part. I mean, the interception against Texas was kind of, I don't know what that was, but if that's what you're picking out over 6 quarters, you might have a pretty good quarterback. Who is the star running back? Is it Frazier? Okay, if it's Frazier, he's going to need some help. It cannot just be him. The years of just like Todd Gurley's going to run it or Nick's going to run it all the time, like that was 10 years ago. Football is not played like that anymore. I mean, it was hardly played like it then. Where are you at with the wide receivers? Like, well, you may know the answer to that from the transfer portal. So that might be the answer to that. What about the defense? Defense had its worst year statistically under Kirby Smart ever in 2024. Okay. Who's going to come in and make some plays there? I'd say Justin Williams, first of all. That'd be kind of where I would start. But there's no obvious. I mean, you're losing Warren Brinson and Stackhouse, Ingram Dawkins, Mikael Williams. Those were 4 guys that played a lot of football for Georgia. Okay, a lot of football for Georgia. Smile Munden played a lot. Jalen Walker played a lot. These are all guys that played a lot of football. You get back C.J. Allen. I mean, I don't think there's a lot to be concerned about on the linebacker part. It's the line and, perhaps the secondary. I mean, the secondary, Malachi did not have the year that I thought he would have, but he had a good year. Dan Jackson really had a very good year. So you're losing 2 really good safeties. At corner, you're probably better positioned than I thought you'd be coming into this thing. But again, it can be 2 things at the same time. I thought the defensive line would struggle more than they did, and yet, at the same time, it was their worst year statistically, defensively in a while. And maybe they weren't as bad as I thought they'd be, but they did. There were plenty of times where they did not stop the run the way they needed to. And like for all this discussion about, well, you got to stop the quarterback now. Yeah. Like that's been the case since, at least since Tim Tebow, probably since before that. But like Tebow, Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel, you had Deshaun, you had, Jameis Winston, a little bit, Jameis Winston's crazy ass. I mean, there were plenty of Cam for sure, Tim Tebow for sure, Deshaun, Stetson, Joe Burrow to some degree. I mean, Jalen Hurts. There have been guys, you've had to stop the run with the quarterback. This is not a new phenomenon. Like the Carson Becks of the world, there's not a lot of them. And Carson Beck's really good, but he's not a dual threat guy. He's dual threat enough. And that's the thing about Gunner too, is like everybody's wanting him to be Stetson. That's not who he is. He's not that. Go watch them both run. They're not the same type of, runner. I mean, that's not the TCU player on a blitz. Georgia was up 17-7 or something like that. And they're at midfield. Here comes TCU blitzing. No one bothered to pick up the TCU blitzer. Didn't matter because Stetson turned and ran and picked up 20-something yards. You cannot defend against that. Like that, what made Georgia very difficult was Stetson and all the other people around him. And that's why the guy lost one game. What was it? Well, he lost the Alabama game. It wasn't a lot of losses. So, his ability to leave and move forward is exceptional. That's not quite the same way that Gunnar Stockton plays. Gunnar Stockton is, this is going to sound bad. He's slimier. He's not like, he's going to like slither his way forward. He knows how to run quarterback draws. They ran quarterback draws with Stetson. I remember the Auburn run, which was a long run. He needed oxygen after that in 2022. They really didn't play great against Auburn for 3 quarters, and they just blew them out. But these are not the same thing. So I've gotten quite sidetracked here. But, is Gunner exceptional? By me not answering that question, by me not posing that question, does not suggest doubt or, being a hater. We just don't know enough yet. And if you're in the comments talking about how great Gunner is, that's great, but he's not shown that over a 6-quarter period. It's been really good. It's not shown great. Great is what took Stetson about 6 games to get to. It took Carson Beck about 4. When you think about, starts, it took Stetson didn't start until Auburn, Tennessee, Alabama. That went backwards. And then Kentucky, that was bad. And then he got hurt against Florida. Those were the games he started, and they lost 2 of those games. Then he went to the side, and then, he didn't start again until Arkansas and then Auburn. It took him almost 7 starts to get rolling. I would argue it took Carson about 4, and then it was start number 5. for him, which was a Kentucky game, and then he was like a different player almost. For Jake Fromm, at least until the Mississippi State game, but he was not being asked to do what these other guys have been asked to do. That's just what it was. Mike Bobo, it took him a season. Like, you never know how long it's going to take. My suspicion is, however, that when you saw sort of Stetson in 2021, it already had starts. And he got to kick it into high gear and start number 2 in 2021. Is that what Gunner's going to get in 2025? I don't know. Because he's going to need better offensive line play. He's going to need Dwight Phillips to steal him 6 touchdowns in 2025. On 30 plus yard runs. When you look at, I don't know what's going to happen with the running backs in terms of the future, but you're going to need some cheap, easy plays. You're going to need Oscar and Lawson Lucky. They're going to have good seasons. The offensive line's going to have to be good. And I understand, I can always, with what I do for a living, I can always feel the fear or the overconfidence from Georgia fans. It's just what it is. And it's usually fear. They're good at that because Larry Munson taught them so well. But this group has the ability to win the national championship. What I don't know right now is, are they, is 25 one of sort of 2 rebuilds in a row? Because what does rebuild mean anyway? It just means you didn't win. That's what it seems to me is like, you had something and you didn't win it, and now you're going to do this. They had, coming into the season, one of the guys that people thought would win the Heisman. Same thing at Oregon. Same thing at, Tennessee. And we know who won the Heisman. It wasn't a quarterback. So we know who won the national championship. It was Will Howard in Ohio State, who looked bad at times. Okay. Bad is maybe a stretch, but they looked bad against Michigan. So it may not be as simple as it's been in the past in terms of being able to lump phrases or terms on top of people and guys. That's going to be harder to know. But, I understand the fear, because fear is part of, not knowing something, okay? Or at least it's part of a lot of people's not knowing something. But I don't know that 25 is as negative a thing. Looking from 6 months away from it, I'm not sure people should be as fearful as they probably are right now. But thanks for watching.